I said, but I'll take it. He says, I'll give you a glass of orange juice. And I never heard of a glass of orange juice. I just saw an orange, you just suck it. Anyway, he was a very nice man. I asked him, I said, how come you're still in your house? You still have your yard? He says, if you don't ask a question, I won't ask you a question. I says, if you ask me a question, I'll tell you. He says, I came from Obama. And he turns around to me and he says, what is your name? I says, why? I said, my name is Anni Goldhagen. He turned around to me and says, is your mother Yeti? I'm in Bucharest. My mother, God knows where she is. I said, how do you know? He said, your father's name was Leon. I said, yeah. He said, your mother comes from a very religious house. I said, yeah. I says, how do you know her? And he turned around to me, he says, I was in love with your mother, but your grandfather wouldn't let me marry her because I wasn't exactly the Jew that he wanted me to be. I said, okay. He says, you're his daughter? You were her daughter? I said, yeah. He asked me a question because he was born there. All of a sudden, bingo. I'm in Bucharest, which I never was. Never been there. And the guy I'm sleeping in his cellar knows my mother. Now, if you don't think that's coincidence, you tell me something else. He made sure that I got to, at that time it was Constantinople. You know what it is now. We used to call it Constantinople, okay? It's in
Turkey.
Istanbul, but to us it was Constantinople. He took me to Constantinople, and he was with me there probably 8 days. Bought me food, made sure that I wasn't cold. He says there is an Israeli ship, a Palestinian ship coming into port here. He says, would you like to go to Palestine? I says, I'll go any place so long it's warm. He says, look, if you get on that ship, if they'll take you. He says, you know that when you come into Palestine, at that time it was still Palestine. You know the Jewish people of Israel don't all the immigrants from Europe coming into Israel because they take away the jobs. They'll fight you. What do you mean, Jews fight Jews? Why would they fight them? They've been persecuted all over the place. Why would they fight them? It says, they'll fight them. So you'll have to be very careful which way you're going. Will you turn to the right or to the left? But in the meantime, in Constantinople, we still had the Nazis. We couldn't get away from them. And the ones that used to wear those kofiyas, those Arab, you didn't know if they were a Nazi or they were an Arab. You couldn't tell. So I asked Rappaport, I says, you think I should put on a kufiya and wear one of those white robes? He says, no, Annie. He says, as soon as you open your mouth. I says, well, I can speak a little bit of Arabic. I says, not nice words, but it took more than 2 weeks. It was I think he left me there, but he left me enough Turkish money. He left me enough clothing. He said that he couldn't stay there any longer, but when the ship comes, don't start running towards the ship. He says, I want you to stay put, and then when somebody gets off the ship, just tell them that I paid for the passage. I said, okay, I'll tell him. Well, I'm sitting there, sitting on the bench. It's nice. I open my eyes and the Arabs staring at me, and I keep saying, they didn't like what I said. But that's the only words I knew. Good. And finally, 3 ships arrived. One was the Bulbul, that's the name of the ship. One was the Tigris, and one was Beit Shean. That's Beit Shean, that means house of worship. Okay? It was a Hebrew name. And I said, oh God, now maybe I'll get. But I looked at those ship, I says, oh my God, that's worse than the cellars. I mean, there was no down below, there was nothing. There was just a ship with a deck. And you could see that the ones that were navigating the ship, standing out there, and I'm looking, I said, well, I'm looking to see, where do you sit? I found out the hard way. You just get on it. And they weren't too nice of people either. I went on the Bulbul. The other 2 ships, we finally got out of port. We had to go at night. And when daylight showed up, the ship that was next to me capsized. And ours started to capsizing, and I fell into the water and I didn't know how to swim. Some angel must have come and plucked me out of the water, because the people that were on the next ship, none of them survived. So they had something like, I don't know, between the 2 ships, they probably had 300. It was just like one after another, kids and everything, There was no bathroom. So there is no shame. Even when you were in the cattle cars, there was no shame. You had to go to the bathroom, you go. I mean, people don't understand. When you have to survive. I didn't know what survival was. Every time I turned around, I was someplace else. I sleep on the floor. I eat garbage. And the next thing I know, I'm back on the floor again. I mean, and if you have to, it took almost 4.5 weeks. Now that the history tells me, after I got there and after a few years I learned, it took 4.5 weeks to get from Istanbul to Haifa. But we didn't go to Haifa, we went to Tel Aviv. You've heard all those names, so it doesn't make much difference. And yes, in Tel Aviv, we had what we call, I call him, I don't know. You've been to New York City, right? Most of you. No? You've seen the Jewish people that wore black hats, and the woman in the summertime, she's suffocating from heat, but she's covered from head to toe, okay? And the boys the same thing. You know, those things. What we call them in Hebrew, they call them charfatim. They are let's put it this way. Palestine wouldn't have had a war had it been for those people in Jerusalem helped the Arabs for the war in Israel. And it's not a joke, it's the truth. They didn't like, the Jews in Israel was more, in Palestine, was more modern, you know, they had, you know, they kept the Sabbath. You couldn't go ride in a car or something like that in Jerusalem. Ask my husband, he comes out of it. He drove a Jeep in Jerusalem. He got bombarded with watermelons. You don't drive in Jerusalem on Sabbath. No way. You don't drive in Jerusalem on Friday night either. The first 2 stars appear, you better get off the road. You walk. But I got there, and they said that some of the people on the third ship didn't drown all of them. And guess who was on the third ship? My sister. A little girl. When she got off with the in Haifa, she looked at me and she says, I asked her, I says, are you from Rama? I didn't know, I didn't recognize her. She says, yeah, but she says, I said, where's Mama? I don't know. I says, Rena, what have you been? I mean, it's 1944. Where have you been all this time? Well, she told me the same story. She ate dirt and she ate that, and they took everything away from her. And she says, a guy that used to live next door to us, remember? She says, I was a little girl. He always used to give me corn. And corn, only pigs eat it. Till I came to the United States. Yes, pig. I never heard of corn. Now they call it polenta. We used to call it one-legged. Oh, God. And to make it, I've talked enough. Make a story, long story short, it was, if I tell you every little detail that happened in camps, it would make you sick. I've crawled so many over dead bodies that after a while I didn't know if they were dead or they were alive. I didn't even care. Then I came to a land of freedom, to Haifa. And I go out on the street and I get shot at. And the next thing I know, I'm trying to go to a store over there. I just forgot the shots. And there's bodies laying on the sidewalk. Oh, God. The Nazis are now in Israel, too. You don't know. So I came from a war and went into a war. And I said, I don't think I want to stay here. I really didn't want to stay here. But I went to, I don't know if you know anything about I went to a kibbutz, which is, it's a big farm. Lots of people work there. They have orchards, and it's like a farmland, like, oh, let's say like on the way to Nichols, but it's bigger. You know, there's cows and things like that. And people moved into a kibbutz like that. They get their food, they get their room, clothing, they get a clothing. It never comes back the same clothes that you wear. But you get clothes that you can wear. You get up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. You go out in the fields. You pick grapes or whatever else that's out in the fields. Then when you come in, you have to put your feet in a lye to disinfect your feet when you come into the main, you know, the dining room, and everybody is assigned a job. They have a doctor. They do not have a hospital. And I was only in the kibbutz about, I don't know, 4 weeks. And I hear somebody hollering over a big loudspeaker. They already changed my name. My name from Annie went to Hannah. And I didn't know what Hannah was. Nobody bothered to tell me. And I just listened to listen. And then they finally say, oh, I mean to say, honey, you have a sister here. She's in a room by herself. She has typhoid. And nobody has had it here. So would you go and take care of her? Not again. So I went to the door, and my sister really scared me. She didn't know who I was. She saw my father being hung, and she wasn't with me. She saw all those people being killed and thrown into a grave. She saw her share, but she wasn't hurt. But now she's hurt. And I kept telling her, Lena, Daddy is dead. I said, where's Mama? I tried to get her. I said, where's my mother? She didn't know. She said she left me. That's all she said. She left me. I said, how can she leave me? A 10-year-old kid wandering around in Europe. How did you get to that place? I didn't know. To be honest with you, unless you live through the horror that I have seen, I hope to God you never see it. I hope you never see anything like this ever again, whether you're white, black, colored, yellow, or whatever. Don't ever let them. That was worse than a crucifixion. They'd taken my father and, put him on a tree. But when they chopped his limbs, come on. You're a little girl looking over there and blood flying all over the place. And you don't dare say a word because you're afraid. You're next. Would you say a word when somebody does that? I try to, look, I know the German people, the Nazis. They're good Jews, they're bad Jews. They're good Christians, and some of the Christians are not so good. Okay? Especially lawyers. I had experience with it. But nobody should have to suffer. I know you probably read the book by Anne Frank. That's a good, fictitious boy that they make millions and millions and millions of dollars from Anne Frank. You've seen the movie. Yes, the Danes were very good people. So was the Catholic Church. They took in people. Yeah, at one time I found myself in a cloister. I'm looking around and says, uh-huh, what's that? I couldn't figure out. And pretty soon somebody came in, just talked to me in German, and I answered them. And he says, you're safe, but we're supposed to be quiet. I says, I just want to sleep on a bed. But the beds are not that good. The mattresses are not. So if you have any question, ask the question, but I think I talked enough.
Did you get inducted?
Go ahead.
Did you get inducted in the army?
In Israel? Oh yeah. They took me out of the movie house. We have a movie house in Haifa that the top opens up in the summertime if it doesn't rain, okay? And if it rains, the top comes together. My girlfriend and I were just walking into the movie. The next thing I know, you're in the army now. We're working over there, and that was in Hebrew. I said, me don't speak the English, don't speak the Hebrew. I spoke it in Romanian. I figured out this guy doesn't know what I'm talking about. He says, yes, I know. He says, you're in the army, and so is Molly. He says, what army? He says, what do you think it was here in Haifa? I said, dead bodies. Why am I in the army? Where am I going? Well, you gotta go to boot camp. I said, where's boot? Look, I'm ignorant. I only had four years of schooling. And then the war broke out. And I ended up in Israel after the war. I said, what army? They said, well, you're going to Jerusalem and you're going to Nahariya. Okay. I says, I'll take Nahariya. And he says, no, you don't have a choice. You go to Jerusalem, she's going to Nahariya. I said, why, is she better than I am? She's a Sabra, he tells me. She was born there. Her parents were born there. So she was a native, like an Indian that was born, there. And I said, what am I? He says, well, you have an accent, you're Romanian. I says, how can you tell I'm Romanian? I said, I haven't got no papers. I says, how can you take me in the army? I don't have any papers. Don't you have to have somebody that knows me? And then they'll tell them that I have a sister in the kibbutz. So I was in Jerusalem, and they inducted me in the army, and then all of a sudden I get a notification from the Israeli government. They want some papers from me, or else they'll have to release me from the army. I turned to the guy next to me and I said, you're joking, isn't it? No. Don't you have any paper? I says, why would I have any papers? I says, my papers are in Ghana, Ukraine, Poland, Russia, Yugoslavia, Hungary. I says, I don't know where they are. Well, they let me go. I was only in the army for about 9.5 months. I didn't have to go to the front. But if you think that the soldiers are getting indoctrinated in the United States, you haven't seen nothing yet. Nothing. You couldn't survive what they do in Israel. I mean it. Even the strongest people. Even my son Jeff, when he was in Israel, he said, Mom, how can they jump off into a swimming pool that's higher than the Empire State Building? I says, who jumped off of it? He says, my cousin pushed me. I looked at my nephew, I says, you did what? He says, well, he's a Yankee, you should be able to swim. Well, that's the last time he went to the swimming pool. But that's beside the point. I got out and then the try. I met my husband. Because I spoke so many languages at that time. I spoke Romanian. English I picked up. I never saw television. I just heard people talking. And I picked it up. I didn't go to school. And I spoke English. And there was one thing that the United Nations couldn't do. They could drive a Jeep into a town, into a village. The only thing they can have is the armband and a flag saying United Nations. No gun, no nothing. And there was too many accidents. They like to steal American Jeeps. So, I worked for that hotel where all the United Nations boys were staying, American mainly, a couple of suites. And I told Mr. Butati, which he was an Arab, he says, Annie, you can go to Nala, you can go to Ramat David, you can go all those places and get the fresh vegetables. I said, yes. He said, but we'll have to ask to give you a Jeep from the United Nations. I said, no, I don't. I said, you give me a Jeep, it'll be an Israeli Jeep. I don't want no flags flying around my Jeep. And they did, and that's how I met my husband. I met him July 1st. Oh, I knew him beforehand. But me and him didn't have good rapport. I kept saying, if he goes out in the front of the hotel, I said, that gal that sits across the street from me was an army camp, and she's sitting over there with a stand gun, pointing exactly at the hotel. And if she wasn't a friend, it would be a disaster. Then I got married the 26th of July. And I've been married 58 years. To the same God.
Annie, the
Yeah.
question that I was going through my mind, when you were talking about when you were eating garbage and stuff.
Yeah.
And then when that Mr. Rappaport
Uh-huh.
fed you, how were you able to, they say if people have been starving that they can't handle a lot of food at once.
Oh, I handled food. I never saw me handling food. When your stomach, I'll show you a picture of me, I don't have it here. I think Walt has it in his wallet.